You wake up and realize no one is coming. No one is going to save you. No one is going to make the decision for you. No one is going to tell you that you're on the right track. And in that moment, you feel the weight. Not fear exactly. It's the silence. The silence that follows you everywhere. The absence of guidance. The void where you expected support, approval, recognition. But Seneca, that old Roman wolf who survived exile and betrayal, saw it differently. He believed that the moment life stops carrying you is often the moment it finally begins shaping you into someone capable of carrying yourself. Seneca wrote, "Difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body." The hardest truth to accept: support can make you comfortable, but comfort rarely makes you stronger. The person who learns to remain steady without constant encouragement, without recognition, without someone always pointing the way, develops a freedom that cannot be taken away. When your confidence no longer depends on who believes in you, your direction becomes much harder for other people to influence. First, the absence of support is not a disadvantage. It is a forge. Most people live with the belief that they are falling behind because no one is helping them. Yet the strongest foundation is never built on constant reassurance. It is built by learning to govern your own mind when reassurance never arrives. The moment you stop measuring your life by who stands beside you and begin measuring it by who you become in moments of solitude, everything begins to change. What once felt like loneliness becomes freedom. What once seemed like a disadvantage becomes the greatest advantage you never knew you possessed. This idea seems almost impossible to accept. Most people naturally assume success belongs to those with the strongest support system. They believe progress depends on encouragement, opportunity, or having the right people appear at the right time. We are taught that confidence comes from praise, that courage comes from being understood, and that the right circumstances arrive before meaningful change begins. But this is a lie. When those things are missing, it becomes easy to believe life has placed you at a permanent disadvantage. But that is not true. Second, waiting for permission is the real prison. Over time, this belief becomes something deeper than a passing thought. It shapes the way you see yourself and the choices you make. You hesitate before taking risks because you are waiting for reassurance. You postpone difficult decisions because you hope confidence will arrive first. You convince yourself that the next opportunity or the next piece of encouragement will finally be enough to begin. Without realizing it, you stop building your future and start waiting for permission to build it. Days become months, months become years. The life you imagine never feels any closer because the conditions you are waiting for remain outside your control. Seneca recognized this pattern. He understood that dependence often wears the mask of hope. Expecting approval from those around you feels harmless. But every expectation carries an invisible cost. The more your peace depends on another person's approval, the less control you have over your own mind. If your confidence rises only when someone praises you, it never truly belonged to you. It was borrowed, and borrowed things can always be taken away. Third, inner authority cannot be borrowed. This is why Seneca placed such extraordinary value on inner authority. Not because support is unimportant, but because the strongest foundation cannot be built upon something that exists outside your own character. External support is unpredictable. It appears, disappears, changes. Sometimes it never comes at all. Character is different. It is built through small choices repeated until they become part of who you are. Seneca taught, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The Stoic does not reject help when it arrives. Instead, they refuse to make their ability to move forward dependent upon it. There is a profound difference between appreciating support and requiring it. One creates gratitude, the other creates quiet captivity. Fourth, dependence is trained through ordinary decisions. Few people notice how deeply this dependence shapes their identity because it hides inside ordinary thoughts. They postpone applying for opportunities because they fear rejection without someone encouraging them first. They delay learning new skills because nobody believes in their potential. They abandon meaningful goals because recognition comes too slowly. None of these decisions seem dramatic on their own. Together, they create a life built on permission instead of conviction. Every delay reinforces the same message. I cannot continue until something outside me changes. Eventually, that message stops being a passing thought and becomes an identity. The person no longer sees themselves as capable of leading their own life. They become someone waiting to be chosen, waiting to be validated, waiting to be rescued from uncertainty. But uncertainty has never asked for permission before entering anyone's life. It arrives without warning, indifferent to whether we feel prepared. Seneca understood this with remarkable clarity. He believed that postponing responsibility because conditions were imperfect only strengthened fear. Every avoided decision quietly trained the mind to avoid the next one as well. Fifth, the silence becomes familiar. When outside support begins to disappear, something unusual happens. At first, the silence feels uncomfortable because it removes all the familiar distractions that once occupied your attention. There are fewer opinions telling you what to do, fewer voices offering reassurance, and fewer opportunities to convince yourself that your next step depends on someone else's involvement. What remains is the one place many people spend their entire lives trying not to visit, their own mind. For a while, this feels less like freedom and more like exposure. The absence of guidance forces you to notice thoughts that had always been hidden beneath constant activity. You begin to recognize how often hesitation dressed itself as caution, how frequently fear disguised itself as careful planning, and how many delays were quietly justified by circumstances that were never the true obstacle. Without the noise of constant validation, there is nowhere left to place responsibility except within yourself. And that realization can feel unsettling before it becomes liberating. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Most people assume that loneliness is difficult because there is no one nearby. In reality, loneliness becomes difficult because it removes the escape routes that keep a person from confronting themselves. As long as the world remains loud, it is remarkably easy to blame the environment. There is always another distraction, another conversation, another reason to postpone difficult reflection until tomorrow. Silence interrupts that pattern. It does not accuse you or demand anything from you. It simply reveals what has been there all along. Sixth, fear loses its disguise. As excuses begin disappearing, fear becomes easier to recognize for what it truly is. Fear rarely announces itself directly. More often, it appears disguised as perfectionism, endless preparation, excessive caution, or the constant search for one more piece of information before beginning. These disguises feel intelligent because they sound responsible, yet they often lead to the same outcome. Nothing changes. Seneca never suggested eliminating fear because he understood it belongs to human nature. Instead, he refused to grant fear the authority to make decisions on his behalf. Once you recognize its voice, it gradually loses its ability to quietly direct your life from the shadows. It still exists, but it no longer speaks with unquestioned authority. Seventh, responsibility becomes relief. As this inner conversation grows more honest, something remarkable begins happening. The silence that once felt heavy slowly becomes familiar. Instead of fearing your own thoughts, you begin listening to them with greater patience. You notice patterns repeating themselves, emotional reactions appearing under similar conditions, and beliefs inherited from other people that no longer deserve a place in your life. This kind of understanding cannot be borrowed from books or given by mentors. Others may point toward it, but only sustained reflection allows it to become your own. That is why dependence quietly loses its appeal. You stop searching for someone to explain who you are because you are finally doing that work yourself. Most people never reach this point because they spend their lives staying just busy enough to avoid it. They move from one obligation to another, one distraction to the next, filling every quiet space before deeper questions have the chance to surface. On the outside, they appear productive. Internally, they remain strangers to themselves. Eighth, the obstacle becomes the way. As your perspective matures, another possibility begins to emerge. Perhaps these moments are not interrupting your growth at all. Perhaps they are the very process through which growth takes place. This is one of the deepest lessons found within Stoicism. The obstacle does not merely stand in front of the path. Properly understood, it becomes part of the path itself. What once looked like resistance gradually reveals itself as training. Think about how physical strength is developed. No muscle grows by remaining comfortable. Every increase in strength begins with resistance. A weight heavy enough to challenge the body creates tiny tears within the muscle fibers. At first glance, that damage appears negative. Yet those small moments of stress trigger the very process that allows the muscle to rebuild stronger than before. Seneca observed, difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body. Remove the resistance and growth slows to a stop. Keep every movement effortless and the body has no reason to adapt. The mind follows a remarkably similar pattern. Character does not become stronger because life remains easy. It becomes stronger because difficulty demands qualities that comfort never asks for. Patience develops when waiting becomes unavoidable. Courage appears when fear refuses to leave. Discipline grows when motivation disappears. But without resistance, these qualities remain ideas instead of becoming part of who you are. Ninth, emotional discipline is not suppression. Seneca paid close attention to this part of human nature because he understood that emotions are powerful but temporary. He never argued that feelings should be ignored or denied. He recognized sadness, disappointment, anger, and fear as natural responses to life. The danger appeared only when those temporary experiences were allowed to become permanent authorities. A passing emotion can provide useful information, but it cannot always provide wise direction. If every decision is made in the middle of fear, fear eventually begins shaping an entire life. If every action depends upon feeling inspired, progress becomes unpredictable because inspiration rarely arrives on command. The Stoic response was remarkably practical. Feel what you feel. Observe it honestly, but do not surrender your judgment to it. Allow emotion to exist without handing it the steering wheel. That small distinction creates an enormous difference because it separates awareness from obedience. This is why emotional discipline is not emotional suppression. Suppression pushes feelings into the background while pretending they no longer exist. Eventually, they return with even greater intensity because nothing has actually been understood. Discipline takes a different path. It notices frustration without becoming consumed by it. It recognizes fear without allowing fear to write the next chapter. It accepts disappointment while continuing to move in a meaningful direction. 10th, success is not measured by applause. The goal was never to become someone who no longer appreciated support. Encouragement, friendship, and genuine loyalty remain some of life's greatest gifts. The difference is that they stopped becoming requirements for your progress. Earlier, every important decision seemed tied to another person's response. You needed reassurance before taking risks, agreement before trusting your instincts, and recognition before believing your efforts mattered. Without realizing it, your direction was constantly being negotiated with the outside world. Every opinion carried the power to slow you down or push you forward. Gradually, however, all the experiences that once seemed unfair begin producing a completely different result. They teach you how to continue even when nobody is standing beside you. What first appeared to be abandonment slowly reveals itself as preparation. This is where genuine independence begins. It is often misunderstood because people imagine independence means isolation or emotional distance. Seneca never argued that human beings should reject meaningful relationships. He understood that we are naturally connected to one another and that kindness, cooperation, and friendship enrich life. His teaching was aimed somewhere much deeper. He wanted a person whose judgment remained steady even when approval disappeared. Someone capable of accepting advice without becoming dependent upon it. Someone grateful for encouragement without collapsing in its absence. This distinction changes everything because it allows relationships to become expressions of mutual respect instead of sources of emotional survival. You no longer cling to people because you fear losing yourself without them. Instead, you choose relationships freely because your sense of direction already exists within you. Freedom is not the absence of connection. It is the absence of dependence. As Seneca wrote, fate leads the willing and drags along the reluctant. The silence, the uncertainty, and the moments of standing completely alone were never signs that life had forgotten you. They were quietly teaching you to become the one person you would always need beside you. Strength was never waiting for the right people to appear. It was quietly growing every time you chose to move forward without them. The greatest victory is not proving yourself to the world. It is becoming someone who no longer needs the world's permission to become who they were meant to be.